Till remember the exact moment I realized the house had gone completely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not the quiet that wraps around you like a blanket on a Sunday morning when the coffee is hot and the light is soft and you have nowhere to be. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that presses against your ears. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing, aware of the sound your slippers make against the kitchen tile, aware of how loudly the refrigerator hums when there is no other sound in the world to compete with it. I was 61 years old, standing at the kitchen counter, and I had just made 2 cups of coffee. Out of habit, just like I had done for 30-something years. One for me, one for whoever was nearby, a child stumbling downstairs in pajamas, a teenager grabbing a mug on their way out the door, a husband reading the paper at the table. But there was no one nearby anymore. There hadn't been for a while. I stood there looking at that second cup, steam rising off it in slow, soft curls, and something inside me cracked open quietly. Not dramatically. Not the way you see in movies where a woman slides down a wall and weeps into her hands, just a small internal fracture. The kind you don't hear but you feel, deep in the chest, low and hollow like a bell that has already stopped ringing. I poured the second cup down the drain. And then I sat down at my kitchen table alone and I thought, when did this happen? How did I get here? Where did everyone go? And the more honest question, the one that took me months to even find the words for, what did I do wrong? My name is Carol Ann Whitfield, though I haven't gone by my full name in decades. To my children, I was just Mom. To my husband, for 24 years, I was just Carol. To the women at my church and the neighbors on our street, I was the one who brought casseroles when someone was sick, the one who organized the school fundraisers, the one who showed up. I always showed up. I grew up in a small town in western Ohio, the second of 4 children, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who was quiet and steady, and loved us all in the practical way men of his generation knew how, by fixing things, by being there, by never leaving. I learned early that love was a verb. You didn't just feel it. You did it. You showed it through sacrifice and presence and putting other people's needs ahead of your own, especially when you were a mother. That was just the way it was. That was what being a good mother meant. I believed that with my whole heart. I still do in a way, but I believe it differently now. I married Richard when I was 26. He was a good man, steady like my father. He worked in insurance, coached our son's little league team for 3 years, and always remembered to bring flowers home on our anniversary. We weren't a passionate love story. We were something quieter than that. We were partners. We built something together, a home, a family, a life that felt, from the outside at least, very solid. We had 3 children. Danny came first in 1989, then Laura 2 years later, then our youngest, Michael, in 1995. And from the moment Danny arrived, pink and screaming and impossibly small, I understood what my life was for. It was for them. I want you to understand what those early years looked like, because I think it matters. I think the story of how I lost myself began long before I realized anything was wrong. I had a job when I met Richard. I was working as an office administrator for a small law firm in Columbus, and I was good at it. I was organized and efficient, and I genuinely liked the work, the problem solving, the managing of 100 small details at once, the satisfaction of a day that ran smoothly because of things I had done. I had a little savings account. I had a studio apartment with a window box where I grew herbs. I had a group of girlfriends I met for dinner on Friday nights. When Danny was born, Richard and I talked about childcare. We talked practically, the way young couples do when they're still optimistic and haven't yet understood how heavy certain decisions will become over time. And I said, almost casually, almost as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, I said I'd stay home, at least for the first year or 2, just until the kids were in school. I meant it to be temporary. The first year became 2, 2 became 5. By the time Michael started kindergarten, I had been out of the workforce for 9 years, and going back felt so enormous and so foreign that I didn't. I told myself there was still so much to do at home. I told myself the kids still needed me. And they did. I believed that. I still believe there was truth in it. But I also know now that I had made myself so completely necessary to everyone else that I had become unnecessary to myself. I had given away so much of my own identity, so cheerfully, so willingly, that I didn't quite can. Oh, who I was outside of that house and those children. The herb window box was long gone. The Friday nights with girlfriends had slowly been replaced by school events and soccer schedules and family dinners that I cooked from scratch because I wanted everything to be right. My savings account had been folded into our joint account years ago. I was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. There were years, whole stretches of years, that were genuinely beautiful. The summer Danny learned to ride his bike and I ran alongside him down our street in the golden July heat, laughing and crying at the same time. The Christmas morning, Laura was 7 and woke up at 4 in the morning and came to shake me awake, her eyes enormous, her whole body vibrating with joy. Michael curling up next to me on the couch when he was sick, his head heavy against my shoulder, trusting me completely to make him feel better. Those moments were real, those moments were worth everything. I just didn't understand then that moments are not the same as a self, that you can love your children with your whole heart and still slowly, quietly disappear inside that love. Richard died in 2014. That sounds like a sentence I should prepare you for, but I'm not sure how to soften it because there is no soft way to say it. He had a heart attack at 62 in the driveway, coming home from work on a Tuesday in November. The ambulance came. I rode in the back with my hand on his arm. He died before they could do anything meaningful. And then I was 60 years old. No, 59, I turned 60 that December, and I was alone in a house that had been built for 5 people. Danny was 25 by then. He had been living in Seattle for 3 years. He came home for the funeral, stayed 2 weeks, and then went back, which was the right thing to do. I told him to, I meant it. Laura was 23 and living in Chicago with her boyfriend, who she would eventually marry. She also came, stayed, and returned to her life, which was also right. Michael, my youngest, was still close. He was 19 in his first year of college, just 2 hours away. He came home most weekends that first winter. He was my anchor, though I didn't know then how unfair it was to need him that way. I kept the house. Everyone told me to sell it. It was too big, too much maintenance, too full of memory. But I kept it because letting go of it felt like letting go of everything all at once, and I could only manage one loss at a time. I planted a small garden in the backyard that spring. Tomatoes, zucchini, some herbs along the fence. I told myself it was just something to do, but I think I was really trying to prove to myself that I could still make something grow. The years after Richard's death taught me things about my children that I wish I had learned differently. With Danny, the distance had always been physical. He was in Seattle, I was in Ohio, and we talked every Sunday on the phone. Those calls were good mostly. He asked about my week, I asked about his. We were affectionate if careful. What I didn't understand for a long time was that Danny had emotionally distanced himself from our family years before he geographically moved away. He was kind, but he held himself slightly apart from all of us in the way that some people do when they have decided that need is dangerous. I don't fault him for it now, but back then I kept waiting for a closeness that was never going to arrive, and I blamed myself for not knowing how to reach him. With Laura, the change was more gradual and more painful because we had been so close when she was young. Laura and I used to talk about everything, her friendships, her heartbreaks, her dreams. She was my daughter who called me just to talk, who came home for no reason other than to sit at the kitchen table and eat my cooking and be near me. And then she got married. Her husband, Greg, was not a bad man, but he was from a large, loud, tightly bonded family, and he had strong ideas about how a family should operate, specifically that his family should be the primary one. Laura didn't abandon me deliberately. It was more like a slow turning, the way a plant slowly turns toward the only source of light until one day you notice it is no longer facing the window you placed it near. Gradually, the Sunday calls became every other Sunday. Holidays became negotiations. When their daughter was born, my granddaughter Emma, I expected things to pull us back together, and for a while they did. But babies also give people new gravity, new centers, and I found myself on the periphery of a family I had expected to feel central to. I didn't say anything for years. That was my first mistake. My second was believing that if I just loved them hard enough, showed up consistently enough, needed them little enough, eventually they would feel it and turn back toward me. That is not how it works. Michael, my youngest, was the one who broke my heart most. Specifically because with him the falling away was most clear. He was the one who had been closest to home, closest to me after his father died. We had a relationship that I treasured more than I had words for. And then he met Stephanie. Stephanie was not a villain. I want to say that clearly because I spent too many years almost turning her into one in my mind, and it did me no good and was not fair. She was a young woman who loved my son and wanted to build a life with him, and part of building that life meant that Michael stepped more fully into his own world as he should have. But she did not like me. That was also true. I could feel it in the way she went still when I walked into a room, in the careful politeness that was always just slightly colder than it needed to be, in the way she rarely left Michael and me alone together, as if she was worried about what we might say. Michael began canceling plans. First 1 visit a month, then 2. He stopped calling just to talk. When I reached out, his responses were warm but brief, and more often I had the sense I was talking to someone who was standing with one foot already out the door. One Thanksgiving, I sat at a table that I had set and a meal that I had cooked, turkey and 2 pies and the green bean casserole that had been in our family since I could remember. And I watched my youngest son answer 3 texts from his wife during the meal, excuse himself twice to call her, and then leave 3 hours earlier than he had said he would because she wanted him home. I drove him to his car in the driveway. He hugged me. He said he loved me. He said they'd planned something for Christmas. I stood in the cold November air and watched his taillights disappear and thought, I am the last stop before the rest of his life. I went back inside and sat down at the table with the dirty dishes and the leftover casserole and the 3 pies nobody had fully eaten, and I sat there for a long time in the silence that had become my most constant companion. The winter I turned 62 was the winter I hit what I can only call a wall. I don't mean I broke down, I didn't stop functioning. I still got up every morning. I still made coffee, still tended my garden when the weather allowed, still went to church on Sundays and the grocery store on Thursdays. From the outside, my life probably looked perfectly fine. But inside, I had started to ask a question I couldn't stop asking. Was it me? I went back over everything. Every choice, every sacrifice, every decision I had made in the name of being a good mother. I had given up my career. I had given up friendships that required energy I was directing elsewhere. I had given up years of developing my own interests and passions because my children's interests always felt more urgent. I had been available, dependable, selfless. And I was alone. That juxtaposition did not make sense to me. I had believed, truly believed, that if you gave your children everything, your time, your presence, your whole self, they would love you in a way that never diminished. I had believed that the sacrifice was the investment and that the return on that investment was family. Connection. The knowledge that you would never be truly alone because you had poured yourself into people who carried you with them always. Instead, I had 3 children who were living their lives, full, busy, genuine lives, and who called me occasionally and visited rarely and thought of me. I think, the way you think of a house you grew up in. Fondly, distantly, occasionally, with the assumption that it would simply always be there. I had made myself the house, solid, dependable, always there. Houses don't get called just to talk. Houses don't get invited along. Houses wait. I had turned myself into something that waited. I called Danny one Sunday and instead of asking how he was, I told him the truth. I said, Danny, I need to tell you that I've been feeling very lonely and I miss you, and I'd love to find ways to be more present in each other's lives. There was a pause, a long one. And then he said, carefully, the way you speak to someone who has said something that makes you slightly uncomfortable. Mom, we talk every week. I check in. I don't really know what more you want from me. I said, I don't want more checking in. I want more of you. There's a difference. Another pause, and then, I think you need to find things that make you happy, Mom. You can't put that on us. He wasn't wrong exactly, but he wasn't entirely right either, and the conversation ended with that hollow, careful politeness that told me nothing had really passed between us. With Laura, there was one conversation I need to tell you about because it was the one that finally made something shift in me. It was an ordinary Tuesday. She had called, which was unusual enough that I answered immediately, my heart a little lighter. We talked for a while, surface things, and then I said gently T. Had I'd noticed we'd been less connected lately and that I missed her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I have turned over in my mind many times since. She said, Mom, I love you. But I think you've made being a mother your whole identity for so long that now that we're grown up, you don't know who you are without us needing you. And that's not something we can fix for you. That's something you have to figure out yourself. My first reaction was hurt. A hot, immediate hurt that made me want to defend myself, to say that was unfair, to say I'd given everything. My second reaction, hours later, sitting in my garden with the evening coming down soft and orange around me, was something more complicated. Was she right? Not about everything, not about all of it, but enough. I sat with that question for a long time, and slowly, painfully, honestly, I began to think that she was, not because I had done something wrong by loving them, not because the sacrifice had been a mistake, but because somewhere along the way in all that giving I had stopped also being. I had stopped being curious about myself, stopped pursuing things that were only for me, stopped maintaining the friendships and the interests and the small personal joys that were mine and no one else's. And without realizing it, I had placed the entire weight of my own fulfillment on my children's presence and need, which was not fair to them and had left me dangerously hollow when that need, as it was supposed to, went away. This understanding did not come all at once. It came in pieces, over months, in the quiet of my kitchen and the slow hours of my garden and the long Sunday mornings when the church service was over and the whole afternoon was mine with nowhere to be. It was the hardest thing I had ever sat with. And it was also the beginning of something. I called an old friend in March of that year. Her name was Pauline. We had been close in our early 30s, two mothers with young kids on the same street, the kind of friendship that is built on proximity and shared exhaustion and enormous amounts of coffee. Life had moved us apart, she had relocated to Tennessee, I had simply gotten buried in my own world, and we hadn't spoken in almost 8 years. She answered on the third ring and said my name in that exact way she always had, with the emphasis on the second syllable, and something in my chest loosened. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about everything, her life, my life, what we had lost track of, what we had held on to. At the end of the call she said, "Carol, come visit me, come for a week, just come." I almost said I couldn't, old habit, I almost found a reason. Instead I said yes. I drove to Tennessee in April, through the mountains and the early spring green, with the windows down and the radio playing things I hadn't listened to in years. Pauline met me at her door with a glass of wine and no agenda, and we spent 5 days talking and walking and sitting on her back porch watching the birds and not being needed by anyone. It sounds small, it was not small. Something re-entered me on that trip. Something I had set down so long ago I had forgotten it had a name. It was something like personhood. The sense of being Carol, not Carol the mother, not Carol the widow, not Carol the dependable one who always shows up, just Carol who had opinions and a sense of humor and things she found beautiful and things she found infuriating and a whole interior life that had not actually disappeared, just been very quiet for a very long time. I came home different. Not fixed, not resolved, but different. I signed up for a watercolor class in May. I had no particular reason to think I would be good at it. I had never painted in my life. But I had always been drawn to color, to the way light changes on surfaces, to the small beauty of ordinary things, and the class was offered at the community center on Wednesday evenings for 12 weeks, and I signed up before I could talk myself out of it. The first class was humbling. I was one of the oldest people there. My washes were uneven, my colors mudded, and the small study of a lemon I produced looked less like a lemon than a yellow oval suffering from some kind of affliction. The instructor, a patient young woman named B, looked at it and said without unkindness, "You're thinking too hard, try letting go a little." I took that home with me and thought about it for days. I came back the next Wednesday, and the one after that. By the 6th class, something had shifted. My lemons started looking like lemons. I painted a window with a vase of dried flowers, and it was imperfect and quiet, and something about it made me want to cry. I started a small painting journal, just studies, observations, color experiments. I kept it on my kitchen table and worked in it in the mornings with my coffee. I also joined a walking group through the church, 4 women all in their 60s who met every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 7 and walked the neighborhood trails for 45 minutes before the day got complicated. We were not a dramatic group. We talked about our gardens and our grandchildren and the books we were reading and occasionally, carefully, the real things, the hard things, the things that lived at the back of your throat. One morning about 2 months in, I told them about the lonely years, about the second cup of coffee I poured down the drain, about the Thanksgiving dinner nobody fully ate, about the phone call with Danny and the one with Laura. They were quiet for a moment. And then one of them, a woman named Barb who had a dry humor and kind eyes and who had lost her own husband 6 years before, said, "Carol, you kept the house clean for guests who only came once in a while and forgot to live in it yourself." That sentence landed somewhere very deep. I wrote it in my painting journal that night. My relationship with my children did not transform overnight. I want to be honest about that because I think there is a version of this story where the mother has a revelation and her children immediately understand and return and everything becomes warm and full again. That is not what happened. What happened was slower and quieter and more real. I stopped waiting. That was the first thing. I stopped sitting by the phone on Sunday waiting for calls that came irregularly. I stopped reorganizing my week around the possibility of a visit. I stopped building my emotional calendar around my children's availability and started building it around my own. I called Danny less often but more honestly. When we talked, I asked him about things I actually wanted to know, not just how his week was, but what he was reading, what he was thinking, whether he was happy in the deep sense or just the surface sense. Some of those calls were awkward. He was not used to me asking like that, and I was not used to asking. But slowly, over many months, something more genuine started to open between us. He began a call sometimes outside our regular Sunday slot. Not often, but occasionally. It was enough, it had to be enough, and I chose to let it be. With Laura, things were more complicated, and I will be honest, I don't know if they will ever be exactly what I once hoped they would be. We love each other. I know she loves me. But we are still learning how to be mother and adult daughter in a way that doesn't put either of us in an impossible position, and that learning is ongoing and sometimes painful. But Emma, her daughter, my granddaughter, she came to stay with me for a whole week last summer. Just her and me, 7 years old, in this house with the garden and the watercolors. We painted together every morning. She made a painting of a purple dog she named Gerald. I framed it. It is on my kitchen wall. That week was one of the most joyful of my entire life, not because I needed it to be, but because it simply was. Michael and I have been slowly finding our way back to something. It has required me to accept Stephanie more completely and less conditionally than I had before, and it has required Michael to make some choices that I believe were not entirely comfortable for him. We don't talk every week, but when we do talk, it is real. He drove up last October just to have dinner. He stayed 3 hours. When he left, I didn't feel like the last stop. I felt like someone he had come to see. That distinction matters more than I can say. There is something I need to tell you about the garden. I had planted it that first spring after Richard died as an act of stubbornness, an insistence that I could still make things grow. It had been modest at first, a few tomatoes, some herbs. Over the years, as my loneliness deepened, the garden grew in direct proportion, as if my hands needed somewhere to put the love that had nowhere else to go. By the time I turned 62, the back half of my yard was almost entirely garden. Raised beds for vegetables, a trellis for climbing roses, a small stone path lined with lavender that Barb from my walking group helped me plant one Saturday in June. The garden became the place where I processed everything. The early morning hours when the light was still cool, and the dew was still on the leaves, and the neighborhood was quiet, those hours became mine in a way I hadn't had anything since before my children were born. I would work in the soil with my bare hands and let myself think. I would let myself feel the grief of the lonely years without drowning in it. I would think about Richard. I would think about who I was before I became anyone's mother. I would think about who I still might become. There is a particular morning I want to tell you about. It was early September, the kind of morning that carries the first suggestion of autumn even though summer is technically still present. The light a little more golden, the shadows a little longer, the air holding a slight coolness at its edges. I was kneeling in the dirt, deadheading the roses, and I was not thinking about anything in particular. My hands were moving, the morning was quiet, and I was simply there, present in a way I hadn't been in years, not waiting for anything, not measuring the silence against the absence of my children, not writing the story of my loss in my head for the 1000th time. Just there. A monarch butterfly landed on the rose cane directly in front of me. It stayed for nearly a full minute. I don't know why I am telling you this. Maybe because it sounds like a small thing. Maybe because I understand now that the small things were never small. I sat back on my heels and I said out loud to no one, okay. Not a surrender, not defeat, something more like a settlement, a recognition. Okay, this is my life, not the life I planned, not the life I sacrificed everything to build, not the life I thought love would guarantee me. But mine. And there was still so much in it. Morning light on rose canes, watercolor journals, Pauline's phone calls on Saturday afternoons, Barb's dry humor on Tuesday morning walks, Emma's painting of Gerald the purple dog, Michael's voice on the phone saying I drove up just to see you, the coffee that was still hot, even when I made only 1 cup. If I could sit down with the version of myself at 32, the one who was putting everyone else first without a second thought, the one who was pouring herself so completely into her family that she forgot to save anything for herself, I would not tell her to love less. I would not tell her the sacrifice was wrong. But I would take her hands and I would say, also be, not just do, not just give, also be. Maintain one friendship that is entirely your own. Keep one interest that has nothing to do with anyone else's schedule or need. Write something down sometimes, even if it's only for you. Know what you think about something other than your children. Know what you believe, know what you love. Because the day will come when they do exactly what you raised them to do. They will leave, they will build their own lives, they will become their own people. And if you have given them all of yourself, you will have nothing to stand on when they go. Love them the way you love them, but also stay yourself. You will need yourself, you will need her more than you know. That is the lesson I carry now, not like a wound, but like a thing I earned. A hard, quiet, true thing. I am 63 years old. I still live in this house and I have made peace with it, with the size of it, the rooms that don't get used, the extra cup I no longer make out of habit. I have painted every room a color I chose entirely for myself: deep green in the living room, pale yellow in the kitchen, a blue in my bedroom that looks like early morning. I work in my garden most mornings. I paint on Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. I walk with Barb and the others on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I talk to Pauline on Saturdays. I talk to Danny on Sundays and sometimes other days. I drive down to see Laura and Emma twice a year, and Emma comes to me for a week in the summer. Michael calls more than he used to. Last spring he brought Stephanie and I made dinner, and we all sat at the table I had set, and it was not perfect, but it was real. There were moments of genuine warmth. There were moments of awkward silence too, but we stayed at the table together, all of us, and when they left I did not feel abandoned. I felt like someone who had cooked dinner for her son and his wife and had the pleasure of watching them go home together. There is a difference between being left and releasing. It took me years to understand that difference. It is the most important thing I know. My children did not abandon me, they grew up, and I for too long confused those two things. I had built so much of my love around their need that when the need became smaller, I felt as though the love had too. But that was never true. The love never diminished. I just had to learn to hold it differently, with open hands instead of cupped ones, without needing them to fill me in return. I am not going to pretend it doesn't still hurt sometimes. On certain holidays, certain quiet Sundays, I still feel the weight of the house. I still reach for the phone and hesitate, wondering whether I'm calling because I want to connect or because I'm looking for something to fill a space inside myself. The difference is that now I know the difference. And when I find myself standing at the counter in the morning, I make 1 cup of coffee, just one. And I take it to the kitchen table, and I sit down in the light that comes through the window I painted yellow, and I look at Emma's painting of Gerald the purple dog, and I think about what I want to do today. Not what I need to do for someone else, what I want to do. That small freedom, that ordinary, beautiful, quietly revolutionary freedom, is something I will not give away again. Not for anything. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you have ever stood in a quiet house after a lifetime of noise and wondered where you went, I want you to know something. You are not invisible, you are not forgotten. You are not just a house that children grew up in and left behind. You are a person. You were a person before they arrived, and you are still a person now that they have gone. And there is still time, I promise you there is still time to find out who that person is. Leave a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one and I want to hear you. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who might need it tonight. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because there is always a next chapter. And I have learned to look forward to mine.